want to thank you all for joining us. Real quick, if there's anyone sitting in the back, there's obviously plenty of spots up closer with the smaller screen. It might help you. Before we finish, or before we start our final program for the season, I just want to give a quick thanks for everyone for coming out. There's been a few of you folks I've gotten to know and talk to over the season, and we really appreciate you coming in. So, before we start, there's always a couple groups I want to mention and honor. The first group are the veterans. If you're a veteran in the crowd, please stand up and let us thank you for your service. Thank you very much. And then the other group I always like to honor are our docents. If you're a docent, stand up and let us thank you. All right, our speaker today is Todd Anton, and to introduce him, I'm going to bring up a good friend, DR.DAVE. So please give him both a warm welcome.
Thanks, Jason. Show of hands. How many were here about a month ago when we had the Welcome Home Vietnam Vets program? Good. Some of you guys. You were here. Those of you who were here probably remember Susan Anton. She spoke about her 1970 Miss America USO tour to Vietnam. And I have, again, the privilege of interviewing her brother, Todd. And he's about the same height, not quite as pretty, but he'll do. When baseball went to war, and when football went to war. And has been a history instructor for over 30 years. His ability to work closely with students and World War II veterans has earned him national recognition. He has an extensive oral history collection totaling nearly 5,000 interviews of combat veterans from World War II till now. As a son of a World War II veteran, Todd has been inspired on a personal level to honor the greatest generation. His father, the late Wally Anton, played in the Third Army Baseball World Series playoffs at the Herman Goring Stadium in Poland in 1945. Todd's relationship with the Los Angeles Dodgers. How many here are Dodger fans? Oh, there we go. I'll talk about it. His relationship with the Los Angeles Dodgers began with his family's friendship with Mickey Hatcher and Mike Sosa. Anybody remember those names? Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Anton is also a battlefield guide for D-Day memory tours with veterans of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, and has served on the Board of Trustees for Stephen Ambrose's National World War II Museum. He has also advised on multiple movies and appeared on ESPN, Fox News, and Yahoo. Todd lives in Victorville, California with his wife, Susan, and their 2 children, and continues to teach American history. So welcome, if you will, my friend, Todd Anton.
Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'll use my teacher voice. That should wake you up and keep us going. But nothing brings a joy to my heart more than the start of the baseball season. Because it's like you're born again. There's hope there's hope that's always coming. And it's always a new season, a new beginning. Nobody said it better than Vince Scully, but I wanted to start today. You always start with the national anthem. You always start class with the Pledge of Allegiance and all that. But I want to take you to somebody who I think everybody should open the service with. And this is the great Ernie Harwell. And this is, I think, the best tribute to baseball I've ever heard.
Bob is the president tossing out the first ball to the season, and a scrubby schoolboy playing catch with his dad. Man waiting in scorecards. Yeah, that's baseball. And so is a big fat guy with a bullet nose running home. His 714 home runs. There's a man in Mobile who remembers Thomas White in Pittsburgh 26 years ago. That's baseball. So is the scout reporting that a 16-year-old pitcher in Cheyenne is becoming more disgusting. Baseball is a serious race of man against man, reflex against reflex, against inches. Every skill is measured. Every heroic, every clear player is seen and cheered or booed, and then the justice of this. In baseball, democracy is there. The only race that matters is the race to the back. The creed is the rule book, and color there is something to distinguish one team in the form from another. Baseball is a rookie. His experience no bigger than a lump in his throat as he begins both over his dream. And it's a veteran too. A tired old man of 35, hoping that the city muscles can put good up slugging August and September. Nicknames for baseball, names like Zeke and Pie and Kai and Home Run and Tracker and Disney Daddy. Baseball is a clear, true line with white points. The flashing spike of a time bomb and an over 850 named Grass Tarantula. Baseball, just a game, as simple as the ball and bat, yet as complex as the American spirit of civil life. The sport of business, sometimes almost even religion. While the fairy tale of winning a taking really World Series catch is dashing off the plate baseball to the feet of a teenage battle. That's baseball. So is the hockey ball of a doomed Gutierrez saying, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of this earth. Baseball is got hot roasted peanuts for sporting and laying day down in front, taking out the ball game and start playing the bat. Baseball is tongue-tied kid from Georgia growing up to be an announcer and praising the Lord for showing him the way to the town. This is a game for America. Still a game for America. This is baseball. Thank you.
Now, I had to start with Ernie Harwell, because let me make sure you get out of this here. Okay. Help. Sorry. There we go. We'll go here next. I had to start with Ernie Harwell, because if we go back to the slide with Ernie Harwell on it, if we go back to the slide with Ernie Harwell on it, can you help me get back to it? I don't know how to. Okay. Trying to get back to the slide before. Need a little tech help here. There, well, that's not it. Sorry. There we go. We'll start here. Thank you for your patience with that. Now, the reason I have Ernie Harwell here, Ernie Harwell was a member of the United States Marine Corps. Ernie Harwell, as you know, is a Hall of Fame broadcaster for the Detroit Tigers for many, many seasons. When I started putting my stories together and understanding that baseball was a more complex story, a story about players in World War II, there was a lot more to it than I realized, because a friend of mine played for the Dodgers. Mickey Hatcher, Mike Social played for him, but they had a bullpen catcher by the name of Todd Malding. And Todd Malding caught the Dodgers from 1981 all the way up to 1990. And he was at my age, pretty much, Long Beach High School, and he got to warm up the Dodgers. He just fell into this job during the strike. And so I got to know him through Mickey and Mike, and we became really good friends. And Todd moved on from the Dodgers, eventually to the Rockies, and then on to the bullpen catcher for the Tigers. He said, you need to talk to Ernie Harwell. Man, Ernie was a Marine. And I'm like, really? And he goes, yeah, once you get him talking, we'll get him to stop. And I'm like, okay, well, this is great. So I went, my dad had recently passed away, so I went to the ball game. It was the last ball game I ever went to with one of my parents, and we saw the Tigers and the Angels play. The Angels won. The Angels were on their way that season to winning the World Series in 2002. And so we went to the hotel, and I was talking to Ernie Harwell, and Ernie started telling me some amazing stories. Now, did Ernie play baseball? No, but he told baseball, he taught baseball, he educated baseball to so many people. And they love him in Michigan. They love Ernie Harwell in Michigan. But the reason, if you look at the picture up here, Ernie was a combat correspondent for Leatherneck magazine. And towards the end of the war, he was going around to many of the battle sites, Iwo Jima being one of them, Tinian and Iwo Jima. But one of the ones he wrote about, that he told me about, was the Ishima, the island of Ishima. Probably one of the most bombed islands that nobody knows about during World War II. Now, if you look at the pictures I have up here, you'll notice I have President George H.W. Bush there at the bottom. You know, he's the youngest naval aviator in World War II, and George Bush played for Yale University, and there was a young red-headed kid who played against Bush for Fordham University by the name of Vince Scully. And they played each other in college. But George H.W. Bush went on to become the youngest naval aviator in World War II, and he was shot down off of Ishima Island. And the picture there, it's small to see, but that's the submarine that served us to rescue him after he maydayed himself being shot down and crashed. But what Ernie Harwell told me, because he was covering the story, he was on that submarine. And they picked up this flyer. Well, there's this little rubber raft, this dinghy, just bonsaiing out to pick them up. They were Japanese, and they were shooting. And finally, on that submarine there, they started firing back. And that pilot they're rescuing on that submarine is none other than President Bush, that they saved that day. And they pulled him aboard, they got him on there, and all of that. Well, finally, just a matter of a week later, the island of Ishima fell. And what those Japanese patrol boats were doing is they were picking up naval aviators and taking them back to prison on the island of Ishima. And they ate them. They were cannibals on the island of Ishima. They were totally surrounded. They didn't have anybody there to fight with or anything to supply them. So they just picked up naval aviators and harvested them. And Ernie Harwell wrote about that in that edition in Leatherneck magazine. And what Ernie told me, he said, Todd, you've got to understand the war in the Pacific was so much different than the war in Europe. You don't understand the depths of hatred we both had for one another. You need to understand that. And when I'm talking about cannibalism, I'm like, I guess it was different. My dad fought in World War II, my dad fought in Europe. And what I'd like to do is how did this story originate? Where did this come from? This passion for baseball. It happened once I fell right out when I was born. And from the time I was little, my dad took me to my first Dodger game in 1967, set in right field, because he wanted me to see Roberto Clemente play. He wanted me to see one of the great ones. So he took me to see Roberto Clemente, who, by the way, was in the Dodgers farm system for many, many years. But Branch Rickey stole him from the Dodgers and put him on the Pirates after the Dodgers let him go. But we went from 1967 all the way up to now. We've been Dodger fans ever since in our family. But my dad told me, he said, baseball kept us human overseas. We would listen to the games on the radios, Armed Forces Radio Network, and we would listen to the ball game. And it would make us feel human again. He said how important it was for him. So, did he play baseball? He did. He was a really good first baseman, and he played for the 70th Infantry Division in the World Series at Herman Goering Stadium on occupation duty after the war. My dad served 86 consecutive days in combat. He earned 4 Purple Hearts, 2 in World War II, 2 again in Korea. President Truman thought he needed another one. So he went to Korea. And he also was a pilot. He flew artillery spotter pilot in Piper Cub over German lines in World War II. And he never really talked much about baseball his work time. But what happened was, he never talked much about it at all. And then 1998, Saving Private Ryan came out. And when Saving Private Ryan came out, I thought, hey, this is a great film to go see with my dad. Well, for you veterans that are here, the last thing you want to, it's a very personal. My dad taught me that combat is very intimate, it's very personal. And you don't just go talking about it. He said, usually the ones who talk about it the most did the least. So then he told me we would make sure to date quiet girls. So, okay. But what he meant was, don't go asking questions. Let them come to you. Let them talk to you. Let them know you're open to it. So I said, well, will you go see Saving Private Ryan with me? And he said, no. I'm going to go see it with your mother first. Just in case. So they went and they saw it. And then my brother Brent and I went with my dad to the movies. He said, yeah, let's go see it. My dad sat in the middle of us. My brother sat on his right, I sat on my dad's left. He put his arms around us and he held onto our shoulders really tight. He wasn't letting go. And so I had a feeling something big was going to happen. Well, y'all know how the movie starts. The first 20 minutes of that on Omaha Beach is humbling for all of us to watch. Was my dad on Omaha Beach? No. My dad wasn't at Normandy. He landed in the south of France and came up through the central of France and then fought in Alsace-Lorraine. We'll get into that. But he saw a share of combat. But we watched that movie, and we watched what they went through. And if you remember the scene at the end of the movie where Private Ryan is in the cemetery with his wife, and they're all in their 70s at that time. And he says to his wife, tell me I'm a good man. Tell me I've lived a good life. You know that scene I'm talking about at the end of the movie? Yeah. My dad couldn't watch that. That's when he got up and he left. So I can't watch this part. Because you're here, his colleagues, his buddies weren't, he was there. And there's that guilt, that survivor's guilt, whatever it was that he had. He couldn't see that scene, so he walked into the lobby. And then he left, and so we got out of the movie, and then we came out, and my brother said, oh, okay, I'm gonna go home. I'll see you later, you can take Dad home. And I'm like, okay. So I got in the car, started it up, went to back out. My dad said, turn it off. Okay. Because you wanna know how it was? You wanna know how it was? I've never seen my dad cry like that. Because that's how it was. That's how it was. You want to know? Ask me now. And we spent the next 2 hours in that parking lot in Redlands, at the movie theater in Redlands, with my dad telling me everything. And he said, you know why I didn't hug you much growing up as a kid? Because everybody I loved, I lost in Bastogne. And I figured if I hugged you too much, I'd lose you too. And I went, oh, okay, now I understand. They said, can I tell my sisters that? Can I tell Peggy and Susan? He said, yeah, go ahead. And when I did, they said, oh my God, I thought it was me. I thought that was my fault. And I went, no, that's the war's fault. And so when they heard that, from that time on, from 1998 on, our dad was a hugging fool. Every time you saw him, he was just going, yeah. Everything was so amazing. Until a certain day, in June of 2002, we had planned a big event. I was working with Stephen Ambrose, and we were going to honor my dad by presenting him his bronze star that he was given at the end of the service in a case. Here you go. But he never got the recognition. So we had the Department of the Army there to award his medal and everything. And the night before, he died. My dad died on June 6th of all days. June 6th. Now, if you take a look up there, we got, that's my dad there, a young 19-year-old kid, Piper Cub pilot. And you'll notice I have Steve Ambrose and Rita Wilson, Tom Hanks, Steve Spielberg, and me and Tom down below there. Now, when I started recording these interviews for Dr. Ambrose, he said, well, let me see how you do first with your dad, and we'll see if your interviews go anywhere. And 5,000 interviews later, they did, and he loved it. And I love Steve Ambrose. That guy can tell a great story. If you know who I'm talking about, he wrote Band of Brothers, and he was an advisor. His World War II Museum in New Orleans is the best around. It's terrific, but of course I worked there, so I have to say that. But it's a tribute to the greatness of the American spirit. Well, when he flew me out, Steve flew me out to the dedication of World War II in the D-Day Museum at the time. He flew me out there for the dedication. And we were in this big banquet hall, and there was all these tables, and it was $10,000 a plate meal to sit there. Well, I'm a public school teacher. I'm lucky if I can afford $10. You know, when people say, you know, what's the difference between a teacher and a pizza? A pizza can feed a family of 4, you know? And that's what they do. And so I'm sitting around at the table, and I'm looking over at all these other tables, and there at this table is Rita Wilson, and Tom Hanks, and Steve Spielberg, and Tom Brokaw, and Steve Ambrose, and I'm like, and Steve Ambrose is waving me over to come to the table, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to go over there. I'm way out of my league here. What am I doing? But we'd all received these swag bags to go in that had a poster of the dedication of the museum. And I'm looking around at all these rich people in my mind, and they're getting their autographs and everything. So I'm okay, I'll go over there and get one too. So I took my poster over there, and Steve introduced me to people at the table, and they said, hey, this is Todd, and he's caught the bug like I did. He's interviewed 5,000 veterans, and it was really complimentary. I loved it. But Tom Hanks was just like blowing me off. He wasn't listening to anything because everybody's asking him to sign autographs. And then he turns around, he looks at me, and he goes, "Who are you? What do you do?" And I felt really uncomfortable at that moment. I'm like, I said, I'm just a teacher. Because I look around at what all these people were, and I just felt way out of place. And he goes, "Okay, Todd, what do you want to do?" I said, "I want to do what Steve Ambrose does. I want to tell stories. I want to interview veterans. I want to do what he does." And he goes, "What do you think that takes, Todd?" And I said, "I think that takes graduate school and a doctorate degree and all that. And I have a house, I have a mortgage, I have kids." And Tom Hanks says, "Todd, so what you're telling me is you have dreams and excuses. What's it going to be?" And I'm like, "Screw you." I'm like, "What do you mean by that?" You know, and Steve Ambrose grabbed my hand because he's challenging me. He wants you to, he's challenging you. If that's what you want to do, then go do it. Get off your butt and go do it. That's what he's telling me. So I'm like, okay. So I did. So at that time, Band of Brothers was just coming out, 2001. If you remember that, Band of Brothers premiered just days before 9/11 on HBO. And so I was inspired by watching Band of Brothers as 9/11 was going on, because I figured if we went through that, we could go through this too. We're Americans, we can overcome anything, right? Didn't we do that before? And I was being inspired by that. My dad, at the time, was telling me, he goes, "You know, Todd, there are a lot of ball players at Circle World, and nobody's saying anything about them." So I went to Steve Ambrose and I said, "Hey, what about Ted Williams? What about Bob Feller? What about these guys? Why are you talking? You haven't even interviewed them yet." He goes, "I think that is for somebody younger, like yourself, and I think you need to go and do that. You've been told you need to go do something. By Tom, you need to go and do something. I'm too busy doing this, and then we're doing this other thing called the Pacific later on. I don't have time for this. But you do. Let it be yours." I'm like, okay. Then I went back and I didn't know where to start. Until I ran into this guy. Mickey Hatcher. Arguably my favorite player. Probably nobody remembers Mickey Hatcher. But I remember Mickey Hatcher. I hope you do too. I'll show you a short little clip of Mick in the 1988 World Series. Now, get back here. Come on, not this again. Well, can you try getting to the next slide for me? Mickey Hatcher, when he ran around the bases after hitting that surprise home run in the 1988 World Series, he was waving his hand. Not because that he was excited that he hit a home run, but the reason he was a Dodger, the reason he was in baseball, because his dad was a seaman first class in the USS Hornet, and he got sunk in the Battle of Santa Cruz, and then his dad pretty much fractured his back trying to get off that sinking aircraft carrier. His dad was a hell of a baseball player. And his dad said to his son, I mean, he obviously survived the war and everything, but he said, couldn't play anymore. And he said, "Son, you're going to go to play." And Mickey Hatcher did. He went and played baseball and football for the University of Oklahoma. He played for Oklahoma coach, legendary coach Barry Switzer. And he made the Dodgers in the farm system. But when he hit that home run in the 1988 World Series, he wasn't shaking his arms because he was happy. He was shaking them for his dad. He was shaking them for all the veterans. He said, "No, I consciously remember running around the bases, waving my arms in the air, because I was inspired, because my dad survived the sinking of the Hornet. So my brother, Al, who ended up with the Twins, and myself, who ended up with the Dodgers, could be a baseball player." So Mickey, he said, "I am my father's dream." There we go. So that's where Mickey Hatcher came to the story. Well, I told Mickey about what I wanted to do. How I wanted to go around and interview ball players. And he said, "Well, let's find out." So Tigers came into town. I told you my friend Todd was there. Well, they put me on the Angels pregame show. And we started talking about 9/11, baseball players, and the stories just started coming through me. And they realized that, where's this book that hasn't been written yet? And I said, I still need to go and get more stories. And these are stories from people I think you know. And then there's some that are even better than you. People like Bert Shepard. You might have heard of Gil Hodges, Billy Cox. Might have heard of Ted Williams. You might have heard even more about his wingman, John Glenn. People didn't know that. John Glenn was always angry at Ted Williams because he said he took his underwear and his socks. But that's what we're coming up in the second here. All right? Here we go. Now, at the World War II Museum, I came up with the idea of doing a baseball at war conference. And we had a whole exhibition about just kind of similar to what we have up here. But we had some people attend that you might know. We had Kurt Schilling, Jerry Coleman, Bob Feller, Lou Brissy, Maury Martin, and Herb Briefcase Simpson from the Negro Leagues. And then we had the department, we had the CIA there to talk to us about Bernie Tebbetts, who was the catcher that was a spy for the OSS. And it was great because Bernie Tebbetts could speak 5 languages, but everybody said he couldn't hit it anyway. But he could speak 5 languages. He was shadowing the German nuclear program, the atomic program, and he was based out of Switzerland. There's a great movie on that. The Catcher Was a Spy is the name of the movie. But it's great. It's a great story that Bernie Tebbetts, who is one of the founders of the eventual CIA with the OSS. Now, at this convention that we had a lot of people that showed up for it. One of the stories that I had, one of the interviews that I had was with Bob Feller. Probably the most cantankerous guy I came across. What do you want to talk about? I've already said all this stuff before. You haven't said it to a teacher, sir, and you're going to say it to a teacher who's going to let your name be known to a lot of students. A lot of students today don't know what you did, and the only way they're going to know what you did is to have somebody like me take your story down, because they're sure not going to go read about some 80-year-old guy. They're going to do it because I'm going to tell them to. And they have an understanding on it. He goes, I'll give you 30 minutes, $500. Okay. So I paid $500 to do that. So I talked to Bob Feller, as I told you. I interviewed him, and he told me his story and all that. I'll get to that in a second. But at the convention, I had my book, and it was done. We were doing a book signing, and everybody's taking my book up to me. He goes, what's this book? Why don't I have it? And they said, Bob, you don't have the book. And I said, you charged me $500 for a half hour. I couldn't afford the postage. And he laughed pretty hard. And he said, well, Todd, in my life, you need to have sharp elbows because everybody wants to hang on. I said, I don't want to hang on you, sir. I just want to honor and respect you. And that's where that night was kind of special. And afterwards, he showed up at my hotel room with an autographed picture of USS Alabama, an autographed baseball, and a 1949 baseball card from the Cleveland Indians. Pretty cool moment. Now, when World War II started, it started obviously in December. It started during football season. The greatest baseball season, arguably, of all time was over, the 1941 season. We had Ted Williams who hit 406. Ted Williams who hit a walk-off home run at Tiger Stadium to win the All-Star game. Then you had the hitting streak, the legendary hitting streak of Joe DiMaggio. The Dodgers made their first World Series appearance in 1941, losing to the Yankees for the first of many times. But I can say recently that the Dodgers beat the Yankees 4-1 this year, so I had to say that. But the impact of World War II was not just massive, it was almost destroying the league. The baseball almost folded up because of the attack on World War II, or the attack on Pearl Harbor. Let me get to the next slide. Now, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, the commissioner of baseball, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, wrote a letter to President Roosevelt saying, it doesn't seem appropriate that baseball should continue when so many young men are dying overseas. It seems inappropriate. So what do you suggest that we do? Well, President Roosevelt fired back a letter to Kennesaw Mountain Landis. They didn't like each other too much, let me tell you that. Kennesaw Mountain Landis was a huge Republican. FDR, as you know, was a strong New Deal Democrat. They didn't like each other at all, but they loved baseball. They shared that in common, and FDR wrote back to him, he said, Judge, it is in America's best interest that baseball continue. It's good for morale, it's good for the workers, it's good for our spirit. We're not going to let Hitler kill baseball, and so he wrote that letter back right there, called the Green Light Letter, that to Kennesaw Mountain Landis. I had the honor of actually holding that at Cooperstown when we went to Cooperstown. And baseball continued. Now, we didn't say it was good baseball, but baseball continued. You had Joe Nuxall, who was 15 years old, pitching for the Reds. You know, he left high school. He got out of third period so he could go pitch in the second game of a doubleheader, and then went back to school. That's how desperate they were. But they had great players. They did everything that they could. But when they signed up to serve in the war, when they signed up for the war, these players knew that they could die. They knew that their career could be over. But not one of the 40 guys that I interviewed, did they ever regret it. The only person who had issues with it was Ted Williams. Now, the reason Ted Williams had issues with it wasn't because of World War II. They weren't letting him go into the Pacific to fight. They were keeping him at Cherry Hill, North Carolina to train pilots. He's like, I don't want to train pilots, I want to go and fight. He said it's like taking batting practice and never get to go and face a pitcher. You never got to know how you're going to measure up. Ted Williams was insanely competitive. He wanted to be the best. And he didn't get to show it, and it frustrated him. Well, Korea came along, and he was frustrated again. Not because he got to go this time to fight, but he's like, wait a second. I'm in my 30s, and these young kids aren't going to war, but you're making me go. That's because they called up the reservists first. Inactive and active reserve. Inactive reserve got recalled, and Ted Williams was one of them, Jerry Coleman being the other. But when baseball was saved, they made a deal. Baseball said to the war effort that we will raise money for you, for the war effort. And FDR said, okay. Problem was, many people considered baseball to be a monopoly. Football was in its infancy. It was only 20-something years old at the time. But football wasn't protected by antitrust suits, so you had various different football leagues. You even had the Brooklyn Dodgers football club, right? You were playing on December 7th, and when the war broke out. But baseball, so the football was trying to hold on. They were getting devastated, but finally, baseball and the government stepped in to protect baseball as a legitimate war effort need. So let me just show you a quick little clip here of the baseball effort before we start jumping into the players. Jason, I need your help. Well, $80,000 is like, $80,000 would be like $1.something million today for the war effort that they raised at that time. Baseball did that all over the place. They did that. The most fantastic program was at Ebbets Field, where they ended up in World War II raising $1 million in one day, which is a lot of money now, you know, if you take it to our money today. The Red Sox, however, not to be outdone, held Army-Navy games at Ebbets Field prior to doubleheaders, and they raised just almost as much as the Dodgers did. But I tell you that if we take a look, I got to tell you, the competition between the Red Sox and the Yankees still continues today, but the animosity back then was amazing. The Red Sox, we had Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams. Ted Williams arguably should have received the MVP award for 1941, but they didn't like Ted Williams. The press didn't like him because he wouldn't give them interviews, and so they went ahead and gave it to Joe DiMaggio. Yeah, it's not a bad guy to give it to. But again, that was 1941. Well, when 1941, the draft started in 1940 to select the Service Act. One of the first players to go in was Hank Greenberg of the Detroit Tigers. He went in and served his 2-year stint, but he would also play baseball when he was off. It's kind of like what we would say right now with the National Guard or something like that. But Hank Greenberg went in, his service time came up the last week of November 1941. But we all know what happened a week later. They bombed Pearl Harbor. And he said, I'm going back in. And so he went back to the Tigers and said, no, I'm going to re-enlist. I'm going to go back in the Army. And when he re-enlisted in the Army, he joined with the 18-year-old bat boy of the Tigers. And as they went into the recruiting station to sign their papers, about an 8-year-old kid ran up to Hank Greenberg and said, Hank, don't let Hitler kill baseball. And he said, son, I'm not going to do that. And he went in and he served. 500 major leaguers served in World War II. 5,000 served in World War II from the minor leagues. 2 were killed. 2 major leaguers were killed. First Lieutenant Harry O'Neill, United States Marine Corps, was killed by sniper fire at Iwo Jima. Elmer Gideon was in the 586 Bomber Squadron of the 394th Bombardier Group in the 9th Air Force, and he was killed bombing B-1 rocket plants over France that were bombed in London. They were both killed. Nobody remembers them today, but we do here. Now, when that happened, many players started to realize that baseball wanted to protect some of its players. They didn't want Ted Williams. They didn't want Bob Feller. They didn't want Joe DiMaggio to be taken prisoner. And the propaganda that would give the enemy, they didn't want that to happen, so they protected it. But some of the players didn't want to be protected. They wanted to serve. We'll start off with one of the most famous in Ted Williams. Ted Williams, if you don't know, was born and raised in San Diego. His mother is from Tijuana. And Mom would always drag Ted Williams down to do charity work in Tijuana during the Christmas season. And Ted Williams said, I never wanted to see a red pot in front of a store again. I had to stand there with my mom and do that for months on end. And he couldn't wait to get out of it, to get into the service, to get into the military, to get out of San Diego. He played for the Pacific Coast League Padres. He wore number 19. That's why Tony Gwynn wore number 19. Because Tony Gwynn knew a good hitter. Ted Williams knew a good hitter too. And so both of them shared number 19 for the Padres. Well, when Ted Williams entered World War II, I'm going to talk more about his Korea exploits, but when he entered World War II, he was an excellent gunner. He had excellent vision, and he was a one darn good instructor, and they didn't want to lose him. Even though he was begging to go over and serve, they wouldn't let him go. He asked and asked, they wouldn't let him go. Something changed over Korea. They let him go. Because one of the things, and you might correct me, but I want to make sure of this. At one point, President Truman was talking about disbanding the United States Marine Corps. There was discussions about we need to curtail our forces because we had the peace dividend that we had going. So we needed to bring down the Marine Corps. And so the flight program, the flight instructors for Marine Corps pilots between World War II and Korea was pretty much non-existent. That's why they pulled Ted Williams back. That's why they pulled Jerry Coleman back. Well, when Ted showed up in Korea to fly, when he was on the Panther jets, there's one on the flight line out here. And his wingman was none other than John Glenn. They flew together, laughed together, cried together. He tried to teach him how to hit, but he said John Glenn was a terrible student. Didn't have any patience. But he said he had good laundry service. And so Ted Williams always stole his socks and his underwear and his sister's cookies that he sent him. John Glenn said Ted Williams was the biggest and nicest pain in the ass you ever knew. But those guys, there's something about them. There's something overpowering about them. And Ted Williams, if you didn't know, was shot down. He was shot down when he was doing close ground support over North Korea and came in and received Chinese ground fire and it ruptured his fuel tanks and he was losing All he needed to do was get across the DMZ and crash land his plane. That's all he could do. He wanted to eject, but Ted Williams is a tall man in a small cockpit, and if you throw that switch, your knees are dust. You're going to be broken. And he'd seen that too much, with it just ejecting you out of there and fracturing your legs. He said, I'm just going to land this son of a gun, and I'm going to do it. And he belly landed that thing. Well, what did he do? He belly landed that. He got out of the cockpit, took off his helmet, and started beating down on that jet because he was frustrated because he didn't land it back at his base. He didn't fulfill his mission. So he started beating up that plane, and 10 minutes later it blew up. But he was alive. He lost his hearing. He couldn't hear very well after that. That was Ted Williams' experience in Korea. And Ted Williams, till the day he died, or he didn't die yet, he's still frozen right now, but I mean, until the day he died, he said being a Marine was the greatest honor he's ever had. And I believe that. Now I talked to you about Bob Feller. Another one. Bob Feller, who signed his contract at 16 years old on a cocktail napkin in Chicago. Well, he went on to pitch for the Cleveland Indians for many years, no-hitters. Opening day no-hitters. One of arguably the greatest pitchers of all time. But he was sent to Great Lakes Naval Air Station for training, to train athletic training. That's what he's going to do for the war. And he said, no, I want combat duty, and he assigned him to USS Alabama, and he was a gunner's captain, as you can see right there in that picture. Bob Feller's crew shot down 15 Japanese aircraft in World War II. The USS Alabama suffered a kamikaze attack, but they shot him down too. And one of the things I asked Bob when I was talking to him about this, he said to me, you're not asking me anything, nobody else has it. And I said, well, I do have a question for you. When planes were flying in between you and your other ships, did you have friendly fire incidents? Because when you see you lower your guns, those shells have to go somewhere. And he said, you're right. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. And I said, well, are you going to answer it? And the reason, if you think I'm sounding rude, I wasn't. I was under a half-hour time limit when I had to get stuff in. And he said, you're the only one that's asked me that question. Sure we have friendly fire incident. People die in water. That's how it is. Never bury at sea. That's how it is. And I said, well, how do you deal with it? He said, you don't deal with it. You just ignore it. You can't focus on that. You have a job to do. You have people that are counting on you. Because as soon as I let down, one of those planes is going to get through. So we can't focus on that right now. And I said, well, did your experience in combat affect the way you approach the baseball game too? That focus. And he goes, it's the other way around, son. It's the other way around. The reason I had focus was because of it. And I could focus and concentrate on my duty, and I could block all those things out. And Bob Feller is a great man, and one of his greatest contributions to baseball and to veterans was that World War II, Major League ownership was not counting your service time towards your contract. In order to get retirement in baseball, you had to have 10 years of service in. And Bob Feller was noticing that a lot of returning MLB players were getting to their 8th or 9th year and then getting cut because the owners didn't want to pay the retirement. And so Bob Feller organized the first Major League lockout, not because they wanted more salary, but because they wanted veterans to receive the years for their service that they were due. And every ball player I talked to, Jerry Coleman especially, he said, Bob Feller's the greatest patriot out there because he saved a lot of players' careers and they got the benefits and the rights that they earned. Again, a lot of people don't know that about Bob Feller. I think once I got through that whole moment of him being a jerk, he was always very kind to me. Yogi Berra, you all know him. Yogi Berra, good number 8 catcher for the New York Yankees, raised in St. Louis with his brothers, and he went into the service. And his dad, he was fighting to go into the service. His brother said, "Oh, let him go anyway, Dad. He's no use to us here." And he did. He went into the service and joined and became a senior first class. And if you notice, those are PT boats per se. Those are rocket boats. Yogi Berra was at Normandy, providing ground fire, rocket boat fire to support Colonel Ruther's 2nd Rangers going up the cliffs of Point Lehigh. If you know what we're talking about, where the grappling hooks and they would climb up a rope and get on the cliffs only to find that the German guns weren't there after all. But anyway, Yogi provided that. He said the air cover was so thick, you could walk from plane to plane, and you could go from boat to boat, and you could be there. And when he was in the Yankees, and Paul Feller didn't like him very much. Well, you're just a kid. You didn't serve in World War II. Oh, yes, I did. I was in World War. How were you? Him, Bob Feller liked him. That's just how it was. But Yogi always said his time in the Navy taught him one thing: that the world is bigger than yourself, that your team comes first before you, that your loyalty to your team matters. And it's interesting when you think about it, because Yogi was one loyal Yankee, but the Yankees weren't always loyal to him. He'd been with the Astros, he'd been with the Mets, he'd been all over the place afterwards, and then eventually he came back. But Yogi's greatest heart for baseball was how he cared for his fellow veterans when they came in. Yogi Berra, Whitey Ford, Phil Rizzuto, Jerry Coleman, Joe DiMaggio, all were war veterans that he helped mentor when they came back. Jerry Coleman, as we'll learn, went through quite a bit. And we'll get into a story about Jerry Coleman and a little bit with Yogi. He reminds me of that, but it's one that you're going to like. Lieutenant Warren Spahn, arguably the best left-handed pitcher of all time. Some people say Sandy Koufax. I would say it would be Warren Spahn, personally. Warren Spahn served as an engineer, combat engineer in World War II with the bridge at Remagen. He was not on the bridge when it collapsed. He was off of it, getting supplies when it collapsed. But Warren Spahn was a smart man, but he was timid. His manager was a great Casey Stengel. When he came up with the Boston Braves, Casey Stengel went out to the mound and told Warren Spahn, I want you to drill that son of a gun at the plate right now. He's 2 for 3 against us and he's killing us. So just put him on. He goes, I'll walk him. He goes, no, hit him. He goes, I'm not going to do that. He goes, you're going to hit him. Stengel went back to the dugout. Warren Spahn, what do you think he did? Walked him on 4 pitches. He came out, took him out of the game, never pitched for Casey Stengel again. Warren broke out, he was gone. When Warren Spahn came back to the Braves, Casey Stengel went out and said, we had this discussion before. I want you to drill that son of a gun right now. He said, yes, sir. Boom! He was down on the ground. He said, I learned to follow orders. And I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I was afraid that he wasn't going to like me, and after going through combat and seeing men die, this was nothing. I'll drill anybody you want me to, that's fine. And the interesting question is, when the Braves came out later on and played the Los Angeles Dodgers, he got to go to a filming, if you remember, the TV series Combat with Vic Morrow. Warren Spahn got a bit part playing a German soldier, and that's Warren Spahn on the set of Combat in Los Angeles. Actually, Ontario Airport, if you know where that is. Down at Ontario Airport, they used to have vineyards. I don't know if you remember the vineyards that were all around. That's where they filmed Combat. That same vineyard shows up in France and in Germany and Italy. That thing got around more than the troops did. But the thing about it was, he was in it. So I went and found that episode of Combat, and I love watching him play the role of a German soldier. But there's more. Here's a story I don't think you know. Monty Irvin, a great center fielder, right fielder, left fielder for the New York Giants. He was selected to be the first African American to break the color line. We always think it was Jackie Robinson. No, it wasn't true. It was Monty Irvin. We should be celebrating Monty Irvin Day, not Jackie Robinson Day. And I'm saying that as a compliment. Monty Irvin served in the 1313th Transportation Truck Company in World War II. You might know him also as the Red Ball Express. And he continued to serve in the military, all the way up to occupation duty. Because he was on occupation duty, and Jackie Robinson, who we'll talk about later on, was resigned from the Army and started his baseball career a little bit earlier, and Jackie Robinson got picked up, and we know the story that we know today. But I asked Monty Irvin about it. I said, Monty, is there any bitterness when you see Jackie Robinson? He goes, how can you argue with what Jackie did? How can you argue with what he had to endure for all of us? And he said, Todd, it was God's plan. God wanted it this way. It would have been the other way. It would have worked. But no, it had to be this way. I said, no resentment. Nothing at all. He said, no. The only resentment I have is that he was a Dodger. But he's a really cool dude. I really like Monty Irvin. Corporal Luke Brissy. Corporal Luke Brissy was picked up by Connie Mack to pitch for the Philadelphia A's. He was a great left-handed pitcher, very crafty, and then the work came up and he got to go just like everybody else. He was fighting in Italy. He came on a ground fire, and the truck he was driving in got hit in the front. He was blown out the back, and his leg was shattered in about 13 pieces. He was a pitcher, and they were going to amputate his leg, and when they saw on his placard that he was a pitcher, they did all they could to save it. So they put metal braces on it. They wrapped it up. They rehabilitated. But he was able to make it back on a very fragile leg that would swell after he would pitch. And he would have to go after games and literally go into the dugout or into the clubhouse and cut into his own knee so he could squeeze the pus and infection out of his leg so he could continue to pitch. He continued to do that, and I asked him, he and I became really good friends. And I said, why did you continue? He goes, God made me to play baseball. And I'm not going to let all the work that my doctors have done, I'm not going to let them down. If I have to lose a little bit to win a lot, I'll do it. That's just the way you do things, son. Well, when you hear talk like that, it makes anything you're going through in your life so little. Because these men are so big. But we hardly know about Luke Brissy, a great American. Now, some of you know Johnny Pesky. Johnny Pesky, Ensign Johnny Pesky, or John Peskovic, came from a great family, and he was born and raised in Oregon. And now Johnny Pesky and Ted Williams and Dominic DiMaggio and Bobby Dorr are known by David Halberstam's book, Teammates, which is really a good book to read. I suggest you do that. They loved each other. They were brothers. They cared for one another, laughed for one another. They were tight. They were brothers. But Johnny Pesky wanted to fly. Ted Williams was brilliant. He could pick up a book. You can read it. He can memorize anything. Johnny Pesky, he struggled. When they went to flight school together, Ted Williams aced it. Johnny Pesky, let me tell you this. He flew a Piper Cub, and he was supposed to go from one airport, I believe it was Amherst is where he was flying out of. And he was trying to get to Boston, and he got lost. So he landed in a farmer's field and got out and asked for directions. He goes, well, it's up yonder overhead. Just get up over that ridge, and it's right over there. Okay, thank you. He got up, and Ted Williams was waiting for on the flight line, and he goes, where the hell have you been? He goes, I got lost. He goes, you fly a plane like you have stone arms. You don't know what you're doing. And Johnny Pesky said, I know what I'm doing. I just don't know where I'm going. Did he get his wings? He did. Did he fly in World War II? He did not. He stayed stateside, and then eventually they shipped him over to Hawaii to be deployed, but that never happened because of the atomic bomb. But Johnny Pesky's most proudful moment, I should say, was when he went to church. He went to Mass with his father. In that uniform, that's a picture of Johnny Pesky at Mass. His dad took that picture. Because he said, look what America did for the Peskovich family. Look what it made us. My son, the officer. I always love that. He said, Todd, that was a great picture. I love that picture so much. That's Ted Williams and them in a Piper Cub right there. And then that's Johnny Pesky on the right getting his 2004 World Series ring that he never thought he'd live to see. Those players and the Red Sox waited 86 years to see a World Series. Finally, he got to see it. Dominic DiMaggio got to see it. And the team made sure they got a ring. Now here's some, we all heard about Jackie Robinson. We think we know his story, but we don't in some ways. Jackie Robinson was a Fort Hood, and he wanted to receive his commission, and he wanted to go and become an officer. He graduated from UCLA, played football, basketball, baseball for UCLA, All-America, but that wasn't good enough in a segregated world. Anyway, Jackie Robinson went to Fort Hood, and he should be in officer school. He had a degree. They weren't listening to him. Well, there was another officer there at the time who everybody listened to. His name was Joe Louis, boxing champion. Joe Louis said, when they marched in, he said, you have this officer right here. And Jackie Robinson was made an officer thanks to Joe Louis. Well, at Fort Hood, in Texas, we all know the segregation was a reality. You sit in the front of the bus, you sit in the back of the bus, and all of that. Now, there's a painting right there I put on there because it shows the driver of the bus telling Lieutenant Robinson to go sit in the back of the bus. And then he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Officer, sit in the front. He was told no, you sit in the back. Caused a big argument. The police were called. They came and they arrested Jackie Robinson for insubordination, took him in, and they were going to put him up on charges. Court-martialing Jackie Robinson, kicking him out of the Army. He was not going to sit by and idly let himself be humiliated like that because he was an officer. Well, nonetheless, they court-martialed him. He was found innocent, but he was released from his duties in the Army and sent home. He was supposed to serve in the 761st Tank Battalion, the all-Negro tank battalion that fought in Europe during World War II. He should have been there. Did it bother him that he wasn't there? Yes. But it was just one among many humiliations he went through. We all know the story. If you've seen the movie 42, you understand that. But it wasn't just that. Robinson's family was quite impressive. His brother, Mac Robinson, and the reason I have that, his brother ran in the 1936 Olympics, earning the silver medal in the 400 medley relay, only to be beaten, I'm sorry, the 400, I should say that, to be beaten by Jesse Owens. But Jackie Robinson's brother was awarded the silver medal. And he stood on that podium with Jesse Owens when Hitler was looking down at that. Jackie Robinson said that was our family's proudest moment. It wasn't me breaking the power line. That was done by my brother Mac in Berlin in 1936. A lot of people don't know that. I happen to think Jackie Robinson's an American hero just because it makes sense. Achieving your dream should never stop you, regardless of what everybody around you thinks. One of my favorite stories, and you'll see the W jersey that's up here at the front, is Second Lieutenant Bert Shepard, the United States Army Air Corps. He pitched for the Washington Senators, played minor league baseball, and became a P-38 fighter pilot. And he was flying in May, flying missions over France to suppress the troops and artillery units and tank units that would be supporting the Germans in the Normandy invasion coming up in the next week or two. He was shot down as he was flying over not too far out of Berlin, and he crash landed. Well, you know that many of the Germans who were suffering under our bombers hated our fighter pilots, and they called them terror fighters. And so the farmers and civilians ran out with pitchforks, and they were going to run him through. He couldn't get out of his cockpit. The cockpit had crashed down on his leg. A German doctor, Lloydel, beat the civilians to the plane, stood on top of it with his gun and said, "You're not going one step further. He's a prisoner of war." He looked down, and Bert Shepard was unconscious but alive, but his leg was shattered under the cockpit and they couldn't get it out. So what did Dr. Lloydel do? Right then and there, he sawed his leg off and pulled him out of the cockpit. He was unconscious. They took him to a Berlin hospital. And Bert woke up. And they were waiting for him to suffer some type of trauma reaction when they pulled the sheet back to show him that he lost his leg. The first thing Bert Shepard did, he grabbed Dr. Lloydel by the hand and said, "Thank you for saving my life." Dr. Lloydel, a Luftwaffe doctor, there's a big difference between some Germans. Not all Germans were Nazis, I hope you know that. Dr. Lloydel was doing the right thing. He was following the Geneva Convention. He was protecting a prisoner of war. And he took care of him. And he sent him to the cellar. But one of the things Dr. Lloydel fixed him up with was with a wooden leg, a prosthetic wooden leg that fit and he could walk. Not good, but he could walk. And then Bert learned to adapt to that over the coming months that he was in a prisoner of war camp. Well, when he was in the prisoner of war camp, he was hearing all this crap from Canadians and from the Englishmen and from some Australians who were there, how great cricket was. So he says, "Give me that ball. Get up there." And he proceeded to throw 93, 94, 95 miles an hour right past those guys. And you're like, "Oh my gosh, this guy's amazing." Well, there was a program at the time, I don't know if people are aware of this, there were prisoner exchange programs between the Nazis and the American government. The severely wounded and the severely disabled were exchanged through the Red Cross and through the Swiss government, and Bert Shepard was one of them. I don't know if you know that. I thought we were just enemies, we were just fighting. We were still exchanging prisoners, even during wartime. Bert Shepard was sent home, and he picked up, I don't know if you guys know the story, but he picked up his career with the Washington Senators. Clark Griffith, the owner of the senator said, "You're your son, you got a job with us." And he showed up, he tried out, and he made the team. He went out and struck out 8 Brooklyn Dodgers in his first game on 1.5 legs. They tried bunting on him, he picked it up. Everything was great. He was ready to come back that following season. And the American doctor said, "I want to see if we can fix you with a better prosthetic leg." And unfortunately, when they tried to do that, the doctor that operated on him was drunk. And they cut his nerve, they left a nerve that was exposed on his prosthetic leg, and it was hard for him to pitch again. He only made it for 1.5 seasons. But he did pitch, he did make that. So what did he do after that? Well, he became a coach. He became helping other teams out. And one of the teams that hired him was the Boston Red Sox. Ted Williams had trouble with left-handed pitchers, and so he hired Bert Shepard to come in and throw him pitches. But one of the problems was his prosthetic leg was made of wood. So he would throw the pitch, and Ted Williams would swing at it and miss, but when he would follow through, his leg became loose, his ankle became loose. So his foot was inverted at 90 degrees. He picked it up, and the foot would go. And he would start pitching again, and the foot would spin it around. Ted Williams struck out 3 pitches because he was laughing so hard. He got up, he hit a single, off of Bert's wooden leg. His leg went one way, he went the other way, and everybody on the whole team just fell down laughing. Bert Shepard was one of them laughing so hard. Well, one night, when I get back to why this story happened, I remember watching this TV show called This Week in Baseball with Mel Allen, if you remember that. And I couldn't sleep, so I got up after watching that show, and I said, gosh, they were filming this Bert Shepard guy, and there was these Joshua trees at his house. And I'm like, it looks like it's where I live up in Victorville, Hesperia. It kind of looked like they filmed it in the desert, or maybe even down here. So back then, I went over and opened it. It was like 1 in the morning, and I opened up the phone book, and I looked, Bert Shepard, C Street, Hesperia, California. I couldn't wait for 8 o'clock in the morning to come around. I picked up the phone, called him, and I said, excuse me, is this Bert Shepard of the, P-38 pilot World War II? He goes, well, yeah, who the hell are you? And I said, well, I'm Todd, Anton. I'm writing a book on baseball and World War II, veteran stories, and I'm trying to tell the stories of ball players. He goes, what do you want mine for? Because I said, yours is the best story I think I've run across. He goes, well, I'd be happy to interview you, son. Come on in. How long will it take you to get here? You're going to get rid of a car at the airport? And I said, no, I'll see you in 10 minutes. I live in Victorville. Went over and sat and interviewed for 4 hours. And he told me everything that he went through. But one of the things that he told me is how much he loved Dr. Royal, who saved his life. And how much he loved the German people who took care of him. Because they could have done something else. And how much he loved being alive. And he came back and became the PGA Disabled Champion 15 times. And he even beat Jack Nicklaus on one leg. And I said, any regrets on that, Bert? Do you have any regrets? And Bert said, no, Todd, I got to fly a P-38 plane. I got to fly a P-38 fighter. What have you got to fly? Have you ever got to do anything like that? No. He goes, that cost me half a leg? I'd do it again. He goes, you don't understand that, do you? And I said, sir, I think I do understand that with what my dad went through in the war, and I talked to him about that. And he goes, maybe you get it a little bit, but until it happens to you, you'll never know. And that's a good thing, son, that you're never going to have to know that. That's why we fought that damn war, so you didn't have to learn that. So you didn't have to go through that. Bert Shepard is one of my favorites. Now, we all talked about one of the first people to enlist in the war. It was Bob Feller. No, it wasn't. It was Billy Southworth Jr., a B-17 pilot who flew multiple missions over Germany in World War II. And his 2 planes were the Winning Run and Bad Check. The Bad Check was his first plane. His dad was the Hall of Fame manager, Billy Southworth Sr., for the legendary St. Louis Cardinals. Now, when they asked Billy Southworth Jr., why did you name your B-17 Bad Check? He goes, because bad checks are always returned. That's why I wanted our plane to be named that. I thought that was pretty good. And then his second B-17, after there was severe damage to that check, he made it back. But after his B-17 that came through, it was the Winning Run. And you notice on the Winning Run's nose art is that St. Louis Cardinal that's on it. And if you take a look, there's also Billy Southworth Jr.'s hat that he wore for every mission during World War II. The St. Louis Cardinals won the World Series in 43 and 44. And that's his dad sent those hats to crewmen to wear. And they wore that. Not a single crewman aboard the winning run was ever wounded in action or anything. They were successful. He gave credit to the hat. But when he came back from the war, he went to Los Angeles. He was met by Warner Brothers and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and they wanted him to look at him. He was like Clark Gable. They wanted him to be an actor. And he said, no, I'm volunteering for service to learn to fly B-29s in Japan. So he went to learn to fly the B-29, and for those of you aviation experts out here, you know that the B-29 was a temperamental plane. It had issues with the carburetor. And so he was learning to fly the B-29, and so he went to Hudson Bay, the military base, and he was flying from there to Florida. And he was going to go from Florida, and then through Panama, and then into the Pacific, and eventually pick up the squadron to attack Japan. When he took off in New York, the carburetors went out, and his plane went in the Hudson River. Near 200 yards from where Citi Field is today. They couldn't find him. They called and notified his dad that his son was missing in action. And they couldn't find him. We know where the crash site is. So his dad immediately left the Cardinals and came and went on the rescue boat, sitting out there on the rescue boat as divers went down and down into the wreckage to try to find his son. And he sat there, thanking them for looking for his boy. But they couldn't find him. They couldn't find him. 2 months later, he's in Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, the Cardinals are playing the Pirates. He gets a call from the Department of Defense saying that the body is washed up on shore in Flushing Bay. And we want you to come. So he immediately got on a train and went down there. He identified his son. He became a Gold Star manager. He was never the same again. They buried his son on August the 6th of 1945, the day they dropped the bomb in Hiroshima. While the United States rejoiced, the Southworth family lost a son. Billy Southworth Jr., a lot of people don't know him, but we do today. A great American. The first to sign up in World War II. Now, Del Crandall fought in Korea, served in Korea, and was also based in Japan. Del Crandall is the best catcher, and that was said by Hank Aaron himself, the Hammer. So if Henry Aaron said it, you better believe it. Now, Del Crandall was a cantankerous, powerful catcher, great backstop. But what he told me was this. During World War II, we all hated each other in Japan. It was a total racial war. It was total hatred. We all had that. But when I went to Japan, there's a little picture there of one of the kids he helped teach baseball to. He said, the more I taught baseball to the Japanese, the hatred went away. The baseball unified us and brought us together because we spoke a common language. And then he said, yeah, you know, one of the best games I ever played with, we played on this field, and the fence had ivy in it. And it looked like Wrigley Field. I never will forget that. And I said, well, was that in Yokohama? And he goes, yeah, how do you know that? He said, my dad built that field. My dad remembered that the reason he built that field was because the guys he was commanding at the second teenager point in Yokohama, Japan, were too busy carousing too late. They had too much energy. So he ordered them to play. You had to play at least 27 innings of baseball before you could get a pass. That would tire him out. So he said, well, we got to make this field look good. So he got hold of a Japanese admiral who was a gardener in his spare time. He said, we want to make a baseball field. How do we do that? He goes, oh, Mr. Anton, we do that for you right now. So he went and he said, my dad said they laid newspaper all over the field. Then they put manure and grass seed all over it. Then they covered it with other newspaper. And then they watered it down and watered it down. And then over a month, grass was everywhere. And then he said they didn't mow it. They came out with those, what do you call them, sickles. And they would trim it to death. Then they cut out the infield from the grass, and that ground was round and beautiful. And he goes, but the outfield fence was chain link. We didn't like that. So we got these styrofoam paper cups, and we packed those full of ivy. And we stuck those in the hole, and eventually they grew together. He told us that story all the time, and my brothers and sisters were like, oh my God, here's the baseball story. No. And I'd give anything if I had that on recorded now. But when Del Crandall told me the best field I ever played on was that field, I literally broke down in tears. Because that's the field my dad already built, and here's Del Crandall playing on it. Del Crandall became a pitching scout with the Dodgers. He became a coach for the Dodgers. And one of the big things that ever happened to me was I got to be the Dodgers pitching coach for one game. Mickey Hatcher was managing the San Bernardino Stampede years ago, before they became whatever they are now, the Sixers or whatever it is. But they were the Stampede, and they were up in the high desert playing the High Desert Mavericks at the stadium that was about maybe 15 minutes from my house. So I went down there and I sat next to the dugout, the Dodger dugout, and I was ragging my friend Mickey Hatcher saying, oh my God, you don't know what pitches you're throwing. You're throwing the wrong thing. This guy hits fastball. Why do you keep throwing? He's like, you think you're so smart, Todd? You call the pitches. Oh, okay. One's a fastball, two's a curve, four's a changeup, all that kind of stuff. Whatever. So I'm doing that, and so you can send the signs in and do that, and the pitcher's like, no. He throws it, boom, fastball, home run. Mickey goes, he shook you off. I go, he didn't shake me off, Mickey. He shook you off, and you're the manager. He goes, that's right. He goes walking out there, and he goes, you're out of the game. The guy walks off the mound, he looks over at me, flips me off, and I'm like, what? What did I do? And so this guy, the other guy sitting next to me is laughing. It was Del Crandall. He goes, Todd, come with me after the game. We go into the dugout. We go into the little clubhouse they have there. And this guy looked like he wanted to kill me. Del Crandall goes over and he goes, Brad, I want to introduce you to this guy. Come here. Come here. Brad, I want you to meet the new Dodger scout for pitching. The guy you flipped off. I'm so sorry. I was told that you were a friend and that you were just... He goes, no, he's the pitching scout. And then he leaned to my ear and goes, Todd, I think you should get out of here right now. Before Brad Taylor kills you. So I got out of there. That was my moment of kind of that moment in Korea when he was talking about how baseball brought Japanese children and brought our cultures together. That was something very special. Max West also was a tremendous veteran of World War II. He played baseball's greatest game. Now, he played for the, he played for a lot of people. He played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, so that's what made me want to talk to him. But he played, was in the 1940 All-Star game. And again, Casey Stengel was his manager in the Boston Bees. And he got out there and they had to go catch the train to go to the All-Star game. Well, Bill Clem, the umpire, I have him pictured there, everybody hated Bill Clem. And he was supposed to be the umpire at the All-Star game. So Casey Stengel went out to his pitcher and he said, I don't care, we're going to lose this game. But I want you to make this inning go 40 minutes. Because Bill Clem's got to catch a train in 40 minutes. I want you to make sure that this inning lasts 40 minutes. I don't want that son of a gun on the train. He went to Max West and goes, Max, come on, we got to go, we got to catch the train. He made that inning last 50 minutes. Bill Clem never made it to the All-Star game. And the next time he saw Casey Stengel, he said, you son of a gun, I am never going to forgive you for that. He goes, well, nobody likes you anyway, Bill. Casey Stengel is something else. But the greatest game, let's get back to the greatest game ever played. If you see, I have a picture of Iwo Jima there. And you see the Marines that are there being taken care of. Well, they flew in Max West from Tinian and his team to play an exhibition game on Iwo Jima on March 1st, 1945. Well, February 24th is when they raised the flag over Iwo Jima. They're playing a baseball game the following week. Well, if you don't know anything, the Japanese were still there. They were still in their caves. They were still in tunnels. But the bulldozers put a field around, and they put the white chalk on the volcanic ash, and it stood out like anything. And they brought the wounded to sit behind the backstop so they could watch a game. Max West played that game wearing a helmet. The outfielders were all playing wearing helmets. And when the game was over, the wounded stood up and gave them a standing ovation saying thank you. Under shell fire. But they played the game anyway. Max West said it was the greatest game I ever played in for the rest of my life. I'll never forget the game on Iwo Jima. That's why I have Max West there. Maury Martin, another. He was a combat engineer on Omaha Beach. Pitched for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He was also at the Battle of the Bulge. He suffered frostbite and got his leg hurt so bad, kind of like Lou Brissy. When the nurse saw that he was a pitcher, she said, we can't take his leg. There's a new invention that we have, and I want to try it. This nurse saved his life, but saved his leg. She goes, this new invention, it's called penicillin. Let's use it to save his life. And the doctor said, okay. And they did, and Morty Martin's career was saved. And look, he went to pitch for the Dodgers, Chicago White Sox, Baltimore, the Cardinals, Cleveland, and the Cubs. Couldn't keep a job, could he? But he went around, and he pitched for multiple years, and thanks to Bob Feller, he got his pension. For Morty Martin, all he can remember was that nurse, all he can remember is that she's from Georgia. Morty Martin was at the World War II Baseball Goes to War convention that we had back in New Orleans. And he was there. But one of the things about that story that I want to mention is that the president and CEO of the museum, who was Nick Mueller and Steve Watson, somebody was able to track down and find out who that nurse was. She wasn't there, but they called her. And he talked to her for the first time since 1945, saying, thank you for saving my life too, honey. She goes, anything for you, you have blue eyes. I'm almost done, but I got to tell you this story here. And you notice on the stage I have number 14, that's Gil Hodges. Rightfully in the Hall of Fame, much too late. But we all know what PTSD is. Now, Gil Hodges fought in the Battle of Iwo Jima. He was a Marine. He was in communications. He made sure headquarters was always informed. He received the Bronze Star for keeping the command post operative under heavy fire from the Japanese. Billy Cox, number 3, served in the communications unit as well, but in Germany during the war, and he was stringing wire in between lines and came under heavy shell fire. He would run left, the shell would go off. He'd go right, another shell would go off, and he just ended up rolling up into a ball and staying low to the ground until it all stopped. He suffered severe trauma from heavy shell fire, but he made it through. He got back to his lines and continued to do his job. In 1949, on the 4th of July, he was at a doubleheader, he was on the Dodgers. He played third base. In the middle of a doubleheader, back then they had doubleheaders on the 4th of July, so he was out in the middle of the inning, stretching in between games. And back then, I don't know if you remember, if the firecrackers were screaming the firecrackers, so you can light firecrackers and they all go off. Well, a group of kids threw one of those firecracker chains off onto the field. Pop, 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 pop. And Billy Cox freaked out. He started running from center field, zigzagging in, thinking that there was a plane coming down to get him. He was zigzagging in. He jumped into the dugout, got under the bench, curled up into the ball, and was crying. On first base, warming up, was Gil Hodges, and he saw the whole thing. You don't want to run over there, but he just casually walked over to the dugout, sat in the dugout, picked up Billy Cox in his arms, and he held him there. And all he kept saying was, I know, I know, I know. Bert Schott, the manager of the Dodgers, came over and said, well, how about you sit this one out? Sit this game out. Gil Hodges got up and said, Bert, I got to talk to you right now. You've got to play him in that game, because if you don't, you're going to kill him. You're going to put him in that game. And he did. Billy Cox won the game for him that day. The Dodgers won both games and beat the Pirates both games that day. And that shows you the character of who Gil Hodges was. He had the capacity, he was huge, larger than life, but he had the capacity to know that. How did I learn that story? Who told me that story? Ben Scully. Ben Scully told me that story. He said it was the most amazing act of love I ever heard. Now, Ben Scully wasn't there to see it. He was told that to him by Red Barker. And then the last story I want to end up with today is arguably the greatest military baseball player of all time. Lieutenant Colonel Jerry Coleman, United States Marine Corps, New York Yankees. Jerry Coleman served in World War II combat flying the SPD Dauntless, and there's one behind us over there, off of Henderson Field in Guadalcanal. Jerry Coleman wanted to go in the Marine Corps and become a pilot because he heard that's what Joe Foss was. He wanted to be like Joe Foss. Well, he pretty much was. He flew combat, I'll show you a clip on him, in World War II, and then he flew the F-40 Corsair, and that's painted up pretty much similar to what Jerry flew in Korea. He said now they misused the Corsair because the Corsair wasn't meant to be like a bomber. He always viewed it as a fighter. He always said to me that they misused the Corsair. But nonetheless, he provided ground support in Korea. And he was flying a mission over North Korea. He and his wingman, Max Harper. And they were flying over an area called Chinchon, which is right on there. They went down for close ground support, and Max Harper was blown out of the sky. He just saw his wingman just vaporized, gone. And he called in for support. They said, "Do you want us to come and get him?" He goes, "There's no need to come and get him. There's nothing to get." He's gone. Jerry fulfilled his mission. He came back and he landed. He got out of the cockpit of that Corsair, and he was walking towards his flight line because he had to go and do a debrief, as he all had to do after a mission. So he had to go in there. He just watched the death of his buddy. And he goes in, he does his report, and then he gets, one of the junior officers comes over and says, "Coleman, you got a phone call right now. I don't want to talk to you because you got a phone call right now." He went over there, he picked up the phone. It was a guy named Dan Toppy, the owner of the Yankees. He goes, "Jerry, we're in a hell of a pennant race. The Red Sox are running our tail. Any chance you can get to us right now?" This is mere hours after losing his buddy. He goes, "Sir, I'm fighting in the middle of a war right now. I don't have time for this. Nothing, I don't have time for this." He hung up on him. And about another hour or two later, he gets a phone call from a gentleman by the name of Lem Shepard, Commandant of the Marine Corps. "Coleman, pack your gear, you're going home." 40 hours later, he's on the field at Yankee Stadium. He went from that trauma to being on the field at Yankee Stadium, but before he got there, he was in his hotel, and he gets a phone call from a woman he didn't know. He said, "Can you come down and talk to me?" He said, "Okay." He said, "Todd, geez, when you get a phone call from a woman in a hotel, you don't know what you're going to do. You go down there." When I walked down there, walked out of the elevator, and there's Max Harper's wife and their 3 children standing there. And she looked at me and she said, "Jerry, tell me, is he dead?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "You know, the Marines don't tell me anything. I just know he was with you, and I know you wouldn't lie to me." He stayed and ministered to her and talked to her for the next 45, 50 minutes as the Yankee Stadium was waiting for him. It was Jerry Coleman Day. He said, "The hell with that." Talking to Max Harper's wife there. Finally, he gets over to Yankee Stadium. They have Jerry Coleman Day, fly over, they honor him, give him a new car. They're wonderful to see him again. He ends up playing the game, gets a hit, and then you go back after the game, and there was somebody that wanted to meet him. And Yogi comes up to him and says, "Hey, Jerry, some Marine wants to see you outside." He's like, "I just got out of the shower," so I have my towel around me. Open the door, and there's Lem Shepard with 4 stars on each. He goes, "I just jumped to a salute. My towel went down, and there I am in the concourse of Yankee Stadium, next to this jaybird, saluting the Commandant of the Marine Corps." And then all that Lem Shepard could tell him, "Sir, at ease." And they walked back into the clubhouse because they didn't want Jerry Coleman standing out there naked. But Jerry Coleman went on to play after that, continued to play, but he was never the same. Then he became a broadcaster. And one of the joys of my life is Jerry Coleman asked me and flew me out to Cooperstown to see him inducted into the Hall of Fame. It was a very special moment to be able to do that and to see that. Let me show you a little clip of him before I wrap it up here. Hopefully this will play.
Icon, devoted husband and father, friend, Jerry Coleman was this and so much more to all who knew him. But first and foremost, Jerry Coleman was a Marine.
Service to the country, my time in the United States Marine Corps 5 years is more of anything that ever happened in my life. Including baseball, including broadcasting, it is the signature moment of my life, my time in the service in the United States Marine. Never changed in more than that.
Coleman said the proudest moment in a life so well lived was April 1st, 1944, when he received his pilot's wings as a Marine aviator. As a Major League second baseman with the New York Yankees, he played in 6 World Series, winning 4 times. In 1950, he was the World Series most valuable player. That led Jerry to a career as a broadcaster, during which he spent 42 seasons in the Padres broadcast. In 2005, Jerry was honored with the Ford C. Frick Award by the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, for his contributions to baseball as a broadcaster. Jerry Coleman was the only Major League Baseball player to see combat in 2 wars, flying 57 combat missions in World War II. Among the military awards won by Lieutenant Colonel Coleman are 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses and 13 Air Medals. The Jerry Coleman Award will annually recognize a Marine not.
Now Jerry called those medals merit badges. He's like, anybody else would have done that. But it was an honor to know Jerry. And what he kept saying to me though, I asked him about the war and understanding and animosity. He goes, you get past that. You can't live your life in the past, you gotta live it in the future, and you gotta let that stuff go. You gotta let it go, or it'll just eat at you. And finally, make sure I wrap this up here. Okay. Well, in the late 50s, the Dodgers made a tour of Japan. Duke Snider, Don Newcomb, Roy Campanella, Jackie Robinson, Pee Wee Reese, they all went to Japan to build bridges. The owner of the Dodgers, Walter O'Malley, thought it would be a good idea to do that. Well, Duke Snider wasn't really excited about that. He fought in World War II in the Navy. And his best friend also fought in World War II, Pete Rozelle. They went to Compton High School together in Los Angeles. The NFL commissioner for many years, Pete Rozelle, they went there. He wasn't really excited about that, but he did. And that changed everything. The Japanese and the Dodgers are extremely close. Just look at them today. Now, one of the things with that tour that the Dodgers did, they created such great relationships with the Japanese government that many of its artists came and flew over to the United States and built a Zen garden in the mountains behind Dodger Stadium, and it's still there. But it's overgrown because the person who owns the property around Dodger Stadium is Frank McCourt, and he doesn't want anything to do with that. And he's letting that Zen garden overgrow. Well, thanks to the information provided by the Japanese American Baseball Foundation, a friend of mine, Kerry Nakagawa, and everything, we were able to notify the Dodgers that one of those Japanese lanterns still works and is still in the mountain right behind Dodger Stadium where you see the 76 ball in center field. They were able to convince, they didn't have to convince Mr. McCourt. They bought it from Mr. McCourt. And they installed it at the top deck of the park at Dodger Stadium right now. You can go see that right now. That's installed right there. And of course we know the 3 Japanese players for the Dodgers right now. I think that shows you how great baseball is. Going back to that little picture of Bill Crandall was that kid. Now we got great-grandchildren probably of those. I know they are playing for the Dodgers. I think that shows you how far and how unifying baseball can be. And then the last thing I want us to bring up here, here we go, thank you, is I want to close it with my favorite person, 2 of my favorite people, Vince Scully and my father. When my dad died in June 6, 2002, he said, promise me you'll write that book, Todd. And I said, I will. And he says, when I die, do 2 things for me. Take my ashes to Omaha Beach. I was kind of confused with that. You didn't fight there. Why would you want me to take your ashes to? He goes, I didn't fight there. But it was the place where I left Europe to get on a ship to come home and become your dad. That's why I want my ashes in Omaha Beach. Where else do you want them? In center field at Dodger Stadium. I went, how am I going to pull this one off? But I did. We took, thanks to my friend, Morgan Reed, and his family, they were able to get me to Normandy to do that. And there's a picture of me at Normandy there later on with a tour that I helped lead at Omaha Beach, exactly where my dad left to go home. Now, we did put his ashes in center field at Dodger Stadium on Flag Day in 2002. Mickey Hatcher and the Angels just happened to be playing the Dodgers at that time. Social was the manager of the Angels. Mickey was the hitting coach of the Angels, and I said, well, I need to put my dad's ashes in center field. Mickey and my dad were really close, and he said, we're not going to need a wheelbarrow and a shovel. I'm like, how big do you think my dad was? What are you talking about? I said, no, it's just a little bit. The rest we're going to put in Riverside National Cemetery, but just a little bit. He goes, all right, we can do that. So I met him in the parking lot. They had my name. I parked with the Players Park. I got out. I walked through the double gates at center field. Mickey met me out there, and there it was. Just him and me in center field at Dodger Stadium. Nobody was around, just the 2 of us. And he said, Todd, just do what you got to do. I think he was freaked out about this. He goes, just do what you got to do. So I did. Put the ashes, and I did that, and I said a prayer. And I turned around to leave, and he goes, you're not going anywhere tonight. And I go, what do you mean you're not going anywhere tonight? He goes, no, you're with us. So he took me into the Angels dugout. Mike Sosha came out, and I had my Dodger hat on. He goes, "You're not wearing that crap here." And he took my hat off, threw it down, and he put an Angels hat on me. It was a guy by the name of Tim Salmon who played center field for the Angels, and they had Tim Salmon's hat on. He gives me his glove, field and shag balls, and bring them up to me while I throw BP tonight. So on Flag Day, I got to take my dad's ashes to center field. I got to suit up and go out of the dugout and shag balls in center field for the Angels. And I couldn't tell if I was happy or sad. And I'm like, "Dad, you get me in the damnedest places sometimes. This is amazing." And so I'm busy catching balls. I'm not wearing a uniform or anything. I just have an Angels hat on and this catcher's glove, and I'm trying to catch the ball. And so finally, Darren Erstad looks over at Garrett Anderson. Garrett Anderson goes, "Hey, here's the ball." And I go to catch the ball, and Darren Erstad drills me with a fastball like 70 miles an hour. Just boom! Wow, God. And they thought it was funny. They just thought it was funny to pick on, "Who's this guy?" And then Mickey Hatcher runs out there and starts kicking up my dad's ashes and going, "He's burying his dad out here, and you're doing this to him. What kind of jerks do you think you are?" They're laughing. Well, he's laughing. And then if you watch the Angel game that night, Darren Erstad, when he goes to catch a fly ball, he comes up, and he catches it. Because he didn't want to do that. Well, jump ahead a few years later, Mickey gets married, and he invites me to his wedding, and my mom to the wedding. And the Angel players are all there. And my mom's sitting there. And for those of you who know my mom, you know that she's not one to be quiet. And so Darren Erstad is sitting there, and she looks over at him, and she goes, "Oh, you're the nice young man who hit my son with the ball when he was burying his father." And so he turned like red, shades of red, and Mickey thought that was the greatest thing. From that time on, Darren Erstad was very nice to our family. But that goes on to that moment, that when you fulfill your dreams, or when you do what your parents ask you to do, when you have dreams or excuse of what's it going to be. And I'll end it with this, with a message from Vince Scully. But Tom Hanks said, "Dreams are excuses, what's it going to be?" And so when I ran into him at the D-Day Museum, at the World War II Museum, after I'd written my books, I said, "Here, is this good enough?" And he goes, "No, that's not good enough. A dream is something you live, not something you do. Let me know when you know the difference." Okay, I'm trying. I'm still trying. But a dream is something that you live, not something that you do. Of course, it's easy for him to say. But that's something that we can all do together. And I'd like to wrap it up here with a ensign from the United States Navy, who I think says it better than anybody else. That's Vince Scully, not in a mugshot. That's his Navy picture. You always wanted to make, "Todd, that's a Navy picture, that's not a mugshot." I can't imagine him doing anything like that. Let's see if we can hear this, because I think this will sum it up.
This'll wrap it up. It was a 5:45 on the morning in June when a little ship took to the sea, loaded with men of all nations, the vanguard to set the world free. They were guarded aloft by the Air Force and covered each side by the fleet. Each man was sure of his task in smashing the foe with meat. Oh, they all heard the fire of the big naval guns and the shells that were screaming overhead, exploding with roars amidst the enemy ranks and strewing the shore with the dead. As these tiny craft beached at 7:25 that same morning on Normandy shore, to a person of what could plainly be seen that freedom was saved evermore. And now the invasion is over, and soon will be talked of no more. Still, I know that we will never forget that day, June the 6th, 44.
Thank you for your time today. I appreciate you being out here. Thanks for coming. Now, afterwards here in a second, I have some books here if you want to buy some books. I have the books that tells all these stories much better than I could today up here. But if you want, I'm happy to do that. Jason will be here to help me set up in a little bit. If you want to come up, check some of this stuff out. I'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you for your time.